if you don't mind, I wanted to pose two quick questions myself first, and before we get to all the others in the Q&A. And first one is for Lena, is on the whole wheat. You mentioned that is you've not these whole wheat flours that you looked at were not reconstituted, so they were basically a stone ground whole grain. Nothing has been removed other than the outer shell in that sense, right? So some countries, they separate the flour like as if they're making white flour, and that way they take the clears off that have lesser baking qualities and put the bran and the germ back in. Have you seen any of those types of flours? I mean, they would obviously perform differently, but have you seen any of that sort of samples yet?
Yes, absolutely. So we have worked primarily on, well, as you said, grinded wheat samples, and so no recombination. But we have also purchased more industrial type whole wheat flours that were coming from a recombined flour. So
Yes, yeah.
bran plus plus the germ, plus the white parts. And yes, absolutely, there are significant difference between the two groups. In general, the starch that is produced industrially is finer, and that impacts the bread in a completely different ways that doesn't have the same impact on the gluten network, for instance. And so, yeah, we could also look at this from this point of view. The granulometry definitely impacts the results.
And then with that, the other thing that comes to my mind in connection with that, with some groups or people who are developing sort of more specialized flours as far as like a blend of things. So it may not be whole wheat, but it might be like a high protein flour that incorporates, say, soy proteins or proteins from whey or hemp or things like that. So these studies with whole wheat, the way it has impacted, learnings from, absorption and mix times and everything, could then be transferred over to these specialized types of blends to give those developers more control over how to formulate for their products. Would that be a good assumption?
Well, absolutely. This is funny that you mention it, because we are actually working on different projects regarding plant proteins and pulses in particular. So really high protein products. And yeah, definitely we can apply the same types of methods. Not the same. We are developing new methods. But
it gives you a guiding light in that respect, so to speak.
Yeah, it was a good way to approach different products. Yes.
Very cool. Yeah. And Drew, I wanted to just sort of, you touched on soybean, which of course is the most economical and the most widely used. But at the same time, there are, of course, people who either want to avoid GMO or they want to avoid soy as an allergen. So do you also provide like rapeseed lecithin or sunflower lecithin type based solutions, or does that really not come into play as much?
So yes, definitely. And I would also say that soy is just one component in a wide range of, canola oils, high oleics. Inside of release agent, high oleic oils are hugely important. They, A, from a rancidity standpoint, but B, from just a strict performance standpoint, they increase the smoke point of a lot of oils. And so the example of soybean versus a more formulated product, for us, most of what we make are much more formulated applications. But from non-GMO to GMOs to these different ranges to organics, we've been making release agents for 80 years, and so we have a huge cross section. And
awesome.
In our toolkit are all of these base oils, all of these varieties of lecithins are the main key kind of driving components on our oil-based side.
Super.
That's a good question. I would think so, and I think a lot of it was about cakes. I mean, in general, a cake product is going to require significantly more than dough-based. Batter-based products require a much more physical barrier. I have never heard it being like that, but obviously, if you get too much oil on the outside, that could create some issues along the way. So I honestly, that's a little bit of a curveball for me. I've never heard of it being impactful in that way. I've never heard it being a main key driver for that. But I would assume if you add way too much in that case, then you could create an excess amount of oils on the outside.
Yeah, generally speaking, studies that we have done with this have not seen, as you mentioned, with breads especially, there's no impact at all. With cakes, there's probably more concern with the icings or things that go on the cake than any residual release agent that might be left on that, because you'll have much more exposure to the icing. So generally, I would say probably not, unless you have very unusual circumstances. No, it isn't. It is a particular type of wheat breed. It is a wheat that is bred to have a light colored bran, and so they refer to it as white whole wheat. King Arthur has it, ADM, and ConAgra is a big producer of it as well. ADM has several plants that produce it. And ADM was one of the leaders in this as well. ADM has even produced working with farmers, a white whole wheat, soft wheat flour as well, right? And it's even weaker than standard whole wheat. But the advantage is that, say, if you made a 60% whole wheat bread with white whole wheat, the bread looks like bread because the bran is brown. It's sort of targeted at people who turn their nose up at brown bread but need the fiber, right?
That is a challenging question, as I do not have like 2 PhDs in the topic. But the short answer would be that when starch starts to gelatinize in the oven, basically this is what sets the bread structure. And so if the gelatinization is not as fast or as intense, and also depending on how the gluten network is expanding, is allowing the expansion in the oven, well, the final structure of the crumb will be completely different. So we do have papers supporting those links, so I would be happy to redirect to them for more information.
The short answer is yes. The longer, more full answer is that it is fundamentally better than oil or grease-based release agents because you're using more powerful release agents. I always like to look at it just from a release power standpoint. A basic oil, call it a 3. Mono and diglycerides, different types of emulsifiers are kind of 3 times more powerful than that. Lecithin, which is super viscous, is probably almost a factor of 10 times more powerful. And so the ability in a water-based release agent to use lecithin and monodiglycerides allow you not only to spray a much thinner film that creates this wetted barrier, it's your ability to do that. In the end, though, they're lipids and fats inside of both release agents. Those are the actives, but you can spray it in such a judicious manner that there's a much easier, the life between that is much better. And the benefits for water-based release agents for applications where you can actually put water in those areas, because there's a lot of emulsifiers in it, and it's a water-based release agent, it tends to clean up quite quickly and quite effectively. And so yes is the answer, but it's much, much better than oil-based release agents.
Primarily, but the thing is that what I refer to as a stone ground whole wheat, as one that has not been reconstituted, it has, from what the miller will refer to as the clears, and so these are usually a part of the wheat flour that is removed, that has very poor baking quality. It's very high in protein. It's basically diverted to animal feed primarily. So when you have a stone ground whole wheat, you have all of those clears in there as well. So it's not unheard of in North America to see whole wheat flour that is 14 or 15% protein or higher. But the baking quality of that protein, even taking the interference of the bran and the germ aside, the baking quality of that protein, as I'm sure Lena could tell you, is going to be very different than a refined white flour at a similar protein.
Definitely, I can only agree on that. So yes, you're referring to the fact that, yes, it was possible to draw a very, very good correlation between data, the hydration used with the mix lab and the water absorption of the flour during process. And this is exactly the point. This is for the baker to be able to predict how much water he should use according to the flour that he gets. And also to set up specification if he knows that the right water absorption is between this and that, to avoid, for instance, a stickiness issue, other than using releasing agents, of course. That can also be helpful for that.
The parchment paper can be very effective release agent, but bottom line is expensive, and it doesn't really fit sustainability. When you can finally get to the point, it is important, like Lena had said, if you can design around stickiness issues, you should do that. But if you have developed the bread or the product that you want, you need to be able to create this release. And the bottom line for that, again, is the fact that it is expensive. And as people evolve to being slightly bigger bakeries and get to that point, the economics of going to this disposable parchment paper are huge. I mean, again, kind of a factor of 10 once you have your equipment in place, or your proper hand spraying applications. It's just a no-brainer from a cheapness standpoint, and then of course from a sustainability and waste, and the fact is that you have more material handling costs as well.
Yep. I'll start with that one a little bit, is that I think that in today's market, the whole wheat or whole grain appearance of the browner color is associated with health and well-being, so that there is a very large group of consumers who understand that this is good for me and this is better for me in terms of preventing a variety of health issues, as was laid out by Lena earlier in her presentation. So it's for some who are like for children who they haven't graduated to this level of thinking for themselves in terms of health concerns. It's all about, they associate the aesthetics with flavor. So if you introduce them to a good tasting whole grain bread that isn't simply just, piled on with sugar to make it taste sweet, then they will accept it. It will not be a negative thing for them. What we dealt with a lot in the 70s, 80s, and maybe even early 90s was that a lot of whole wheat and whole grain breads were just plain bitter, because of the red bran is quite bitter in terms of making the whole wheat bread, and they're denser. They're not quite as fluffy most of the time, but it's again, it's an experiential sort of preference at times. So if you start your children on, a rich brioche full of butter and eggs and sugar, they're going to turn their nose up at a plain straight whole wheat or whole grain. So, it's not just visual, it's a taste thing. So it's about combining the best of both worlds to get a good flavor experience and texture experience, as well as a healthy product. Would you agree, Lena? Was that a pretty...
That is a very good answer. I have nothing to add.
Because there's the saying that who was it, Marie Antoinette, who said let them eat cake, that translated into English really meaning that let them eat the sweet bread, the brioche, right, which was sweet like cake, right, which was something that was only available to the wealthy. So that was part of the, let them have what the wealthy have, right?
Yeah, definitely. That was not an answer that was good for her at the time. Not a good. Maybe I can start.
Yeah, you've done a lot of work on that area. Yeah.
Yeah, we did, definitely. But here, this is a challenge on a challenge. So we have discussed the specific challenge of whole wheat flours. When it comes to gluten-free, then this is, again, a new world. Here, we are not talking about the fibers preventing the gluten to be forming well. We do not have gluten at all. So yes, of course, the methods that are traditionally used for white flours, again, cannot apply. Here, through protocol modifications, we are able to analyze gluten-free products and be able to, predict a little bit like I've shown you, their behavior during the process, or set up specifications, or even help in R&D formulation. Like with the Mixolab, for instance, you can try and copy usual white flour curve with whole wheat flour gluten-free products. And by doing that, you will have a product that is behaving quite similarly during the process.
Yep, absolutely. And some of the grains to consider starting with for whole grain would be sorghum is one that's very effective, because although it doesn't, it's gluten-free, but it has some proteins that will mimic gluten to some extent, to give you some of the textural properties. Another good one is oat flour, or whole oats, whole grain oats, and one of our sponsors, Grain Miller, they have a lot of gluten-free grains available, and they can help you with some of the formulation there. And so if you work with your partners, you work with a supplier who can get you some of the grains and materials, and then working with Chopin and KPMG, who can give you some of that analytical information and support, and so that you bring all of these worlds together to be able to develop your products.
I think it comes down to just performance. Everybody who's mostly on this call are talking about industrial breads. Whether they're artisan breads or anything else, if you live in this space, you have to have repeatability. You have to have performance. You have to have a pleasant a place where people will want to work, so you can't have a big smoky environment. It's got to be able to be applied easily. And more than anything, the fact is it's got to be tailored for your application.
Yep.
And, not one size fits all for release agents. If you're going to do a cake or you're going to do a bread or a gluten-free product as well, where it might not be as structurally sound, you may have to have more release agent. And so it all comes down to performance, and whether you can use something basic, if you can, great, but most people need to have something that has some greater power performance, and that just is going to translate to the fact that you're not going to be reglazing pans. You're not going to be spending a lot of capital costs in that way. And so it's all about performance and being application specific in my world.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, for any more questions, please go to Facebook group. It's the Baking Industry Professionals group. And you can join the group there and post questions there, and we will do our best to answer them. And we have a number of great experts who contribute in that group as well. Thank you very much, Drew Pope, and thank you very much, Lena.